I am not Neil Levesque. I am Joe Cavazza. I'm the president of St. Anselm. We'd like to welcome everyone here on this event. On behalf of all of St. Anselm College, we're so happy you're here at the Institute of Politics. Our campus is buzzing again. This is a much easier year than the last 2 years have been, and it's hard to believe we're almost a month into the semester. I hope you have a chance to meet some of our great students who are here working as ambassadors. Raise your hands if you're a student at St. Anselm College. So there you are. So, as you know, for more than 60 years, St. Anselm has welcomed presidential candidates and national figures to our hilltop. You may know that we have just completed our 20th anniversary of the founding of the Institute, which was just literally days before the September 11th attacks. And the Institute has faithfully served the college and our wider community with civic engagement, education, empowerment of citizens of all ages. And today, we continue that tradition and look forward to many years to come. I think we would all agree that the mission of the Institute could not be more vital than right now. My appreciation to all of the sponsors that have helped us accomplish this mission. Thank you for your generous support. You can look around and see their logos on the walls. A special thank you, of course, to our great partner, the New England Council, for their valued partnership in this signature Politics and Eggs program. So now, please join me in welcoming my friend, New England Council President Jim Brett, to the podium to introduce today's speaker.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Cavazza, not just for your kind words, but for the ongoing partnership between the New England Council and here at St. A's and the Politics and Eggs. We've had several of these events already this year, and I do have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot of each other between now and the 2024 New Hampshire primary. If I can give a commercial for the New England Council, it's been a very, very busy year for the New England Council, but we have a few more events coming up. This week we'll be in Washington, D.C. for a Capitol Hill conversation with Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut. On Friday, we'll host the next installment of our popular Inside the Corner Office virtual series, this time featuring Dr. Udit Batra, who is the CEO of Waters Corporation. Next week, we'll be back in Washington for a breakfast with Congressman Stephen Lynch of Boston. The next Politics and Eggs event will be right here at St. A's on October 6th, when we will welcome Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. And last, but most certainly not least, on November 7th, we're thrilled to be holding our annual celebration in person at the new Omni Boston Hotel in the Seaport area. We'll be making an exciting announcement about our New Englanders of the Year later this week, and we anticipate between 1,700 and 1,900 of our closest and dearest friends from all of the New England states. But today, we're honored to welcome the former United States Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to the Granite State. The Secretary served as the United States top diplomat from April 2018 till January 2021. He first joined the Trump administration in January 2017 as the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and in fact, is the only person in the history to lead both the CIA and the State Department. Before joining the administration, he served in the United States House of Representatives for 4 terms, representing the 4th Congressional District in the great state. Secretary Pompeo also has a very strong background in the private sector. He founded Thayer Aerospace and served as its CEO for more than a decade, and later became president of Century International, an oil field equipment, manufacturing, distribution, and service company. Needless to say, we are very pleased he could join us here at Politics and Eggs today as he considers his political future, and look forward to hearing his vision for the future of our great country. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to the former Secretary of State, the Honorable Mike Pompeo.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. That's very nice. That's very nice. Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you, especially to the young students. Thanks for getting up that early in the morning. I get it. My son's not that much older than you all. And thanks for the kind words, Jim. Thanks for having an unemployed former diplomat out today. Yeah, the good news on that is I get to be Mike Pompeo unplugged. When you are the Secretary of State, every word that you say is watched by everyone in the world. And today I get this chance to speak from the heart about the things that I believe matter to this country. And I want to thank you, President Favazza, for your words and for your leadership here at this amazing institution. We need only look around to see the history that is in this place. And to get to be some small part of that is humbling for someone like me that just now, 10, 12 years ago, was running a machine shop in Wichita, Kansas. I'm not here just today for the eggs and politics. Happy to have the eggs, although you were commenting on the fact I've lost a little weight. It was eggs that got me home. But we are here for something truly important. It is New Hampshire, after all, the place where Americans kick off conversations that shape the very future of our nation. We all care about that future. It's why you got up today to be here, to listen, to be part of this community. Everyone in this room believes in America. We believe deeply that it's worth fighting for. Someone asked, someone said, are you thinking about running for president? My commitment is I'm going to stay in this fight. I've been at it for a long time. I did it when I was a young soldier. I vote, just like I hope you all will. We can see that some incredibly important things, some greatness of America is truly under threat. I wanted to spend some time this morning responding to some remarks President Biden made a few weeks ago. The President of the United States gave a speech that smeared half the country. He identified half the country as enemies of the state. He essentially said, if you're pro-life or you oppose a certain set of policies, you're a threat to this nation. That can't just slide by. I'm going to stand up for every American that the president attacked. It was hard to know exactly who. America deserves better than that, deserves language that is more decent than that. I want to talk to you about the difference between fighting enemies, which I was committed to do as a young soldier, and then worked on as a CIA director and Secretary of State, and fights with friends, and the capacity of each of us to try and do our best to know the difference. Both types of fight share a common motive. But when we fight enemies, it's war, and it ends with one side defeated. But fighting with friends, we don't defeat an enemy. We convince them. We make arguments. We build the case. These are our fellow countrymen. We have to recognize this distinction. We owe it to each other, and we owe it to this great nation. Doesn't mean you can't fight hard. I'm happy to do that. Enemies seek to destroy our country. I spent time with Chairman Kim. I spent time with Xi Jinping. I spent time with Vladimir Putin. They are bad guys. But by attacking our countrymen, we undermine what makes America great. We have to defend against our adversaries, our enemies with force, but with friends, we build. We talk about ideas, and this is what I hope we'll spend our time talking about today, ideas. We all know that elections have consequences. You run the first primary in the nation here, Godspeed. I hope that continues, because these outcomes matter. Sometimes I think it's out of forgetfulness, or maybe sometimes it's fear or self-promotion. God only knows. Our own countrymen let their personal ambition get in the way and eclipse the idea of the most exceptional nation in the history of civilization. We don't need to defend against them, but we sure as heck need to defend against the ideas that have taken hold of them. Sometimes we have to speak truths. We have to make arguments. We have to build and speak hard truths because we love the country and we love the people who have built it. I want to remind everyone today what makes this nation so special. I traveled around the world in this beautiful white over blue airplane. Thank you for providing that for me. Mary Elizabeth's here today. She was on it with me. It's a little old, but it did beat Delta Airlines, which I'm back to now. What makes American exceptional is the people in this room. Our enemies want to tear it down. And those we defeat. Those we work. President Reagan said, we win, they lose. Those we must defeat. But our countrymen must be reminded and called to account, even when their ideas are flatly and patently wrong. But the only place we want to defeat them is at the ballot box. I hope we'll do that in November. Come January, I hope that those folks who win will then begin to govern, and govern against the principles that they told everyone they would govern on. I think President Biden lost sight of this difference when he attacked half the country. He said that these people were semi-fascist. And if the president can't tell the difference between Republicans and terrorists, or Republicans and the Chinese Communist Party, or if he can tell the difference doesn't speak to that difference, then we have to change course. We have to change out who the leader of our country is. I've been traveling these 19 months doing the kind of work I did when I was a congressman, talking to folks. Most Americans get this difference. There's no better time than today in this historic place to bring it up. We are now just a couple of weeks off from a day that still pisses me off. September 11th, 2001. Enemies, evil men, attacked our country because of who we are and what it is we believe in. And for 20 years, your soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, your intelligence community did amazing work to keep such an event from happening again. And on September 12th, 2001, the young people in this room won't remember that firsthand. We stood together to do more than just avenge the attacks on the World Trade Center, a necessary component, those who attacked the Pentagon and in Somerset, Pennsylvania. But we stood behind America and everything that is extraordinary about this country. We wanted to avenge what took place there, but we wanted to build on our exceptional heritage. I remember we stood together. I was in Wichita, Kansas, trying to take care of my couple hundred employees that were making machine parts. We were in for an economic challenge. But we all stood together in that wreckage and reminded us of the fortitude and, importantly, of the fragility of this miracle that is our country. We stood together with a renewed commitment to defending this nation, its freedom, its faith, and our founding ideas. Side by side, there were Democrats, there were Republicans, there were people from the progressive movement, libertarians. We all believed that American greatness was more important than politics or ideologies, things that divide us in the to and fro of our daily life. We stood together 21 years ago. The president gave a speech that suggests he believes things have changed in those 2 decades. I think we've forgotten. I think we've forgotten too much. Joe Biden delivered his speech in Independence Hall. He did it with uniformed servicemen standing behind him and the presidential seal in front of him. He had an enormous opportunity to unite America by reminding us of the strength. Indeed, he campaigned on creating this unity, the unity that lives in the spirit of September 11th. Instead, he frankly desecrated those symbols that day by giving one of the most divisive presidential speeches I can ever remember. Worse, he used 2 Marines as window dressing. And as an Army guy, we can fight with the Marines on a whole lot of things, but we can't fight and should never challenge the sacredness of those who've chosen to wear our uniform. He called fellow Americans semi-fascist. He called us a threat to the soul and foundations of our republic. He said we were intimidated, authoritarian cronies who want to take our country backwards. I'll speak for myself. I want this country to go forwards. I know you all got up this morning to try and make it go forward as well. Mr. President, I can't tell you what's in your heart. I don't know. But I do know that treating countrymen like enemies is a rejection of the very principles that I served for, that you all got up this morning for, and what has made this country great. Indeed, I don't think any of us know what was precisely in his heart, what drove him to give those remarks to the world and to his fellow countrymen. But we've seen the results of the ideas that he has put forward. His principles, the things that we have been living through these last now year and a half plus, I sum up in 3 ideas: woke, weak, and waffling. Woke ideas, weak resolve, and waffling leadership always end up inflicting a cost on that is more devastating to the cause than any plan hatched in Afghanistan. I've worked 4 years as Secretary of State on problems over there. The biggest risks to America are that we fail to understand how great our nation is, and we won't teach our children that same thing. And as President Reagan said, this is a time when the American people will choose. I think the choice is pretty straightforward. It's not a Republican idea, it's not a conservative idea, it is an American idea. We shouldn't allow the world to see us as woke. The woke would tell you that the people who died in defense of America are intelligence warriors, those who died on 9/11, at Normandy, at Gettysburg, even at Lexington and Concord, that they were sleepwalking into battle, that they somehow were defending something that was racist, a nation that was founded on an idea that was inconsistent with my deep understanding of who we are. I hope that they'll wake up and see that we should spend more time studying 1776 than 1619. This is an amazing nation. Wake up, say the woke. They say we're the ones who are asleep. They want us to forget that America is exceptional. First in freedom, not always perfect, but animated by the very thing that the founders did, not far from here. Yeah, there's times that we've fallen short. We'll get it wrong tomorrow. For 4 years in the Trump administration, we didn't get it right every day. But great leaders, they have come from all walks of life, not all in government service. Leaders like Susan B. Anthony and President Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., they never forgot. They challenged, they confronted ideas, but they never forgot about America as an exceptional place. They celebrated the promise of our country. They saw it could be better, and they convinced their countrymen to make it so. That's the power. That's the beauty of what it is I know everyone in this room wants. They never succumbed to pessimism. It's easy to do. I got up every morning and read a little bit from my Bible, the good news, and then grabbed the intelligence reports, which were all the bad news. I listened to President Biden. He, in that speech, abandoned American hope and replaced it with woke despair. He would replace American sincerity with cynicism, and he would replace American freedom with a woke control. It's fracturing our nation. He teaches and advocates for teaching that what divides us is more important and more significant than what unites us. It's coercive. It is dangerous. It tears at the very fabric of who we are. And I must say, too, it's hopeless. It suggests that opportunity is limited to a handful. It teaches our children that identity, rather than character, is destiny. Martin Luther King Jr. would never have had that. Using race and gender to divide is evil. To create one set that gets preferences because of either of those is evil. It harms us all. Today, you can see parents all across the country. They would tell you that education's been replaced by indoctrination in our schools. And I've seen in our own military, I've seen indoctrination replace the capacity to make sure our warriors were prepared to fight. We've sacrificed military readiness for diversity and equity training. Signed me up for diversity. My first gunner was an immigrant from another place. I chose him to be my gunner not because of who he was or his background or his race or his identity, but because he could hit a moving target at 3 miles at 15 with a sabot round of 105 millimeters. He was good. He was excellent. He was noble. As a young tanker, I knew that color didn't matter. Green mattered. Folks who were good soldiers mattered. If a soldier could do their job under the greatest of pressure in defending their country, sign me up. I wanted him in my platoon or her in my company or brigade. You all know the story. President Reagan spoke to it simply. He said that freedom's never more than one generation away. And it's why we all need to think hard about what it is we're teaching that next generation. Here, places like St. Anselm, and indeed all around the country. The front lines of this fight for ideas, for freedom, are inside our gates. They're in our schools, they're in our synagogues, they're in our churches. They're in the places that matter most to our communities. And I always think, what will our children say when they grow up about our commitment to that fight? I pray that they'll say that we got it right, that we defended the core ideas that made this country special. You know, I talked about the president being weak. That speech was weak too. It evinced a fear. They want an apologetic America, one that thinks that we are a force for bad in the world. I must tell you, as America's Secretary of State, people around the world wanted to see this because they knew. They knew that America was a force for good. Reagan's strong city on a hill, they understood. I pray that Americans continue to understand that. President Biden's policies these last 18 months, I think, have not only demonstrated weakness, but they've made us vulnerable in ways that are almost unimaginable. We're burdened with amazing high inflation. I saw gas prices on the signs as I drove in last night. I see the sign from Dominion Energy. Every utility in the country is going to be charging more for energy come this winter. I pray that there is sufficient energy for Europe and the world this winter. These were choices that were made not to produce American energy for American consumers that's affordable so they can put gas in their cars and heat their homes when the snow falls in places like New Hampshire. Today, small businesses, many of you here, it's tough to find people who understand the work ethic and who are raised with a set of skills that are capable of actually delivering value for a company. It's really hard. And prices aren't the only thing on the rise. I had a young man on my staff mugged in Washington, D.C. in the last 2 weeks. My son lives in New York City. He got married about 8 weeks ago. I worry for them every day. I just came from Oregon. I was just south of Portland, and the people in that room that night used Portland as a 4-letter word. The homelessness, the crime was staggering. Note that none of these, the fact that our murder rate is up 30% in cities and opioid deaths are still at an all-time high, none of these are Republican ideas. Protecting American people from these aren't Democrat ideas. These are American imperatives. Today, illegal immigration is an all-time high. We have a completely open southern border. What's this mean? You could say, well, that's a long ways away. This means fentanyl in your communities right here. It means inevitably more crime. We've had dozens and dozens of people traverse that border in the last 18 months who are on America's terror watch list. 4 million people in 18 months across that border. I come from Kansas. 3 million people in all of Kansas. That is a staggering number of people who came to our country unlawfully. We're a welcoming nation. We're a decent nation. But to allow these people to make this dangerous trek across this border is immoral. I worked on this issue as a Secretary of State. We had a policy which slowed the flow of illegal immigration into our country. When someone tells you, some politician tells you, it can't be done, or we should spend more money in Central America to stop it, I can tell you those won't work. It doesn't require more money. It just means one needs to be serious about protecting America, its sovereignty, our economy, and our kids from fentanyl. They weren't caused by people who've called us Republicans, who've said that we're clinging to our guns and our faith. They've called us deplorables, or the MAGA fascists now, the new phrase. These policies were all caused by weakness from American leadership. We weakened our economy with record spending and regulations. $201 billion in regulatory costs in the new annual paperwork, more than 72,000 new pages of regulations, 69 new major regulations. Anybody think we're under-regulated in America? More than 100 new regulations on appliances alone. It might be good because it may keep me out of my refrigerator, Jim. We were talking about how you keep weight off. Look, he stacked his administration with people whose ideas are to defund the police, radicals who made it easier to be a criminal than a cop. He reversed the very controls that I spoke of, and now illegal immigrants flood our nation, streaming across our southern border. These problems of weakness aren't just here at home either. I spent my time working all around the world. We are now 13 months off from the fact that 13 Americans were killed in Afghanistan in one of the most amazing debacles in American history. We didn't have to leave Afghanistan this way. No one should doubt President Trump's commitment to getting our boys and girls home. I worked on it tirelessly, both as CI director and for 4 years. But we knew there were additional commitments to our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who had served in Afghanistan. We needed to honor their 20 years of work. 20 years of work that I can tell everyone in this room kept you safe. I can't speak to the details, but terror plots emanating from that place were stopped by amazing young American men and women. And we undermined that. We fled the battlefield. We didn't protect the things that mattered to us here. It was reckless. Caused our enemies not to have fear and our allies to walk away from us. That weakness in Afghanistan and the weakness in our willingness for domestic energy invited Russian aggression as well. It's also, as we can all see, encouraging Chinese saber rattling. It is not a coincidence that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine shortly after the disaster in Afghanistan. Woke and weak and waffling has led us to waffle on our standing up to evil on our own streets and on the world stage. We can't permit this to continue. America matters too much. President Biden waffles. He waffles between making statements that are broad and watching his own team undermine them within minutes. I think if I'd have corrected President Trump that way, I would have been the former 70th Secretary of State. He waffles between the foundational faith in America and Americans seeing us as enemies. All of this stems from a central point, a basic moral uncertainty that I think pervades our nation today and one that we should speak about. For me, for those of us who come from a conservative place, the basic question is just as clear as to ask what follows. What's worth fighting for in America? And is this nation worth fighting for? I think every one of you would say yes, I certainly do. And we can never waffle or waver over that central thesis. It's a time for choosing. We can choose to believe in America again, to find greatness in our ideas and in our founding, or we can surrender all the hope that comes with that and give in to defeat or despair. Look, I hope you won't get me wrong today, and I look forward to taking questions from you all. But before the diet, I loved waffles with my eggs. But it's a prescription for disaster when we need leadership that truly does believe in the power of American goodness. We can't afford to waffle in the defense of these central ideas. This is a miracle, America. To be weak on these foundational principles or to give despair that puts wokeness over American wonder is a pervasive risk. And I think President Biden has fallen prey to that. Now more than ever, we have to believe this country is worth fighting for. We need conservative leadership that believes it too, leaders who celebrate it, know that we are exceptional, and leaders who will never apologize for America as exceptional. They need to be battle-tested, strong, stable, certain in the defense of freedom, leaders that have stared down our enemies on the battlefield with their own eyes and got their hands dirty working to defend America. Leaders who, when it's tough, will remember what unites America and the ideas that give lie to the claims of the woke and the weak. We need true believers who will fight for our values and our faith with fortitude, and we desperately need leaders who will unite America around a common cause. Conservatives who are true believers who will fight for our values and with faith and fortitude defend the things that brought you all here. You know, I've now raised my hand 7 times. There's a couple of fellow West Point grads here today. When I solemnly swore that day to protect and defend the Constitution, I had no idea of what the rest of my life would hold. But I did know how much America mattered. I was a young soldier. I patrolled what was then the front line of the Cold War, leading a little tank platoon tasked with stopping the Soviet invasion in a fight where the enemy would have been about 7-1 advantage against us. I know what it means, as so many in this room do, to put your life on the line in defense of freedom. It mattered then, it matters today. I created a couple hundred jobs in Kansas. I fought viciously for those families, to take care of them, to make sure that they could go home and tell their spouse and their kids that they had a way to pay their rent, their mortgage, to heat their home and take them on a vacation, or to drive that motorcycle on a trip they'd always wanted to take. I then got this incredible privilege to serve as your director of CIA. When I take questions today, I used to say I'd answer almost any questions, but now I'm the former CIA director, so I'll answer almost any question. We're going to stay in this fight. The challenge is greater now today, I think, than it's been in an awfully long time. The Democrat line, the ideas that the Democrats are putting forward in consortium with mainstream media, want to make elections about celebrity, or they want to make it about personalities. I hope we'll make this fight about the ideas that matter. Too much is at stake to go at it any other way. It's far more important than any one person or anyone's political fortune. It's a far greater worth than even the most powerful political offices or biggest personalities you can possibly imagine. It has great significance today, especially as we enter this electoral cycle. We're not fighting to right personal grievances or against some Mickey Mouse enemy. We're fighting for our future against real enemies, like the Chinese Communist Party that wants you and your kids to live in a world that is fundamentally different than the one that has given all of us such opportunity and privilege. It's worth fighting for, I can assure you. Everything's at stake. It's time for us to get it back. I'm confident we will. You all came out today. We'll have a good conversation. But I always think about two things. I first think about the folks that I know back home in Kansas. My mother grew up in a little city called Wellington High Class in 1947. When World War II broke out, she went to an aircraft manufacturing facility in Wichita, Kansas, and did her part to help build aircraft for our country, to fight the Great War. I think about the Kansans that I had the incredible privilege to represent for 6 years as a member of Congress. Every day as I traveled the world, I thought about those farmers, thought about my former colleagues at Thayer Aerospace. I thought about the city council people that were just crazy enough to run for city council. I thought about their lives and how the work that I did was a duty to make sure that we did the right thing to protect them and their families. And today I still think an awful lot about the CIA officers. I would stand in this place in front of a wall where there were stars. You've all seen the pictures in the movies, the little CIA logo there on the floor. It's as awesome as they make it in those movies. But even more awesome than that special place are the men who were the fallen at the CIA, who those stars represent, many of whose names we will never know. They weren't Republicans or Democrats. They were Americans prepared to do the right thing in dark places, in an unknown place, who no one was ever going to know what they did. And they gave their life for this country to try and protect the very freedom. These young men and women, they never wavered. They never waffled. They knew the task before them, and they did it with elan and excellence in the way that I pray that our country will do for the decades to come. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to be here. I look forward to talking to you, Jim, and having a conversation with everyone in the room. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. We have time for some questions. Maybe I could just ask a few. Ukraine.
I'm for it.
Ukraine government is pressuring the administration for some more powerful weapons, in particular the missile range that will have capacity of 190 miles. People in Russia are very nervous about that kind of equipment coming into Ukraine. Do you think the administration should support the request?
I do. I give the administration credit for the things they have done, for the tools and weapon systems that they have provided. President Zelensky hasn't asked for our young men and women, right? He hasn't asked for the 82nd Airborne or Marine MAGTF. He hasn't asked for, he just wants the tools to defend his own sovereignty. We ought to provide them to him. My critique has been, and by the way, some in my party disagree with that. My critique has been, we've been slow and late and small. If you're going to help them, give them what they need. Give them the intelligence they need to target the bad guys. You could do this in a very deep and quiet way. The fear that we will provoke Vladimir Putin, I think, is overblown. Does anybody doubt he's provoked? I promise you the thousands of dead Ukrainians know that he's provoked. Vladimir Putin believes that Ukraine is part of Russia like I believe Kansas is part of the United States. And it's hard to buy. If you said, Mike, is Kansas part of America? I'd say, sure. And you'd say, why? And I'd say, well, he very much believes Ukraine is part of Russia in that same way. He's provoked. We should provide the Ukrainians the tools they need to defend their own people. And when we do, we will have protected a friend. The world will see that. That will matter in China. That will matter in Southeast Asia. That will matter in the Middle East. And when we do that, and when we stand up with our friends, and I pray the Europeans will stand up with their friends in ways that they have not, it's their fight, it's in their neighborhood, then I am confident that freedom will prevail there.
As you just mentioned, I mean, Ukraine has scored some significant battles recently.
Yeah.
It appears that the Ukraine army is better armed. The morale is much higher because I think they know why they're fighting for their country as opposed to the Russian soldiers. Are you concerned, though, that Putin may have two options in front of him, either have a doubling down to accept a humiliating defeat, number one, or two, nuclear weapons that he may use, or chemical warfare that he may use?
Sure. He has lots of tools at his disposal. His simplest nuclear weapon to unveil is to deny Europe energy in the next 2 months. If you want to talk about a cataclysmic event, shutting down manufacturing in Germany and France is about as difficult as it gets. And by the way, we talk about this as if it's a long ways away. If German manufacturing shuts down for a 2-week period, there will be thousands of people lose their jobs in the United States of America. Right? Think about BMW plants in Alabama, Mercedes facilities in the South. They rely on German components. If those factories shut down, this will be right here in the United States. Vladimir Putin knows that. So yes, of course, we have to be concerned about that. But our theory of the case for 4 years was that demonstrated American deterrence and resolve will prevent conflict from happening. This is the model that we used for 4 years. I get asked all the time, would this have happened if you were still there, right? And I can't answer that because I'm not still there. But I can tell you this war didn't start in February. Vladimir Putin took a fifth of Ukraine in 2015. So we often, Americans, we remember the moment. CNN's not going to cover that. This war started a long time ago. It started in the mind of Vladimir Putin. That is not going to change. Vladimir Putin's mind has not and will not change. He took a fifth of Ukraine under President Obama. For 4 years, he didn't invade Ukraine or Europe. And then within months of our departure, he did it again. Coincidence? Maybe. I think it was because he knew we were serious. I think things that we did, things like the strike on Qasem Soleimani, right, demonstrated to the world that things that mattered to you, things that mattered to the American people, we were prepared to do. We moved our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, something no president of any party had been prepared to do because of the risk of World War III. We struck Qasem Soleimani. Everybody said, if you do that, the Iranians will attack Americans in Europe and they'll attack Americans at home. They didn't. That did not happen. And so while I can't account precisely for the reasons, I remain convinced that the greater risk is that we are weak and that we waffle. And our friends see that and hedge their bets in ways that are fundamentally at odds with making our lives better here at home.
Do you give the administration any credit on keeping NATO together in their opposition to Russia?
I do, but I give Vladimir Putin most of the credit. We were often accused of not liking NATO. Right? President Trump would tell NATO, you all needed to do more. Sign me up for NATO doing more. He was spot on. I was advocating for that too. The current Chancellor of Germany was the finance minister during my time. I can't tell you the conversations I had about him needing to open up his pocketbook in Germany to put German weapon systems on the battlefield, to put German kids in harm's way. So it was both decent and right for America for us to demand that. We ended up with NATO having like $480 billion more than it had when we began. I pray that some of those resources are benefiting the Ukrainian people today. But I think the Biden administration has done good work. And Secretary General Stoltenberg, the commander of NATO forces, has done good work holding the Europeans and NATO together in this conflict. I hope that that resolve won't be lost when Vladimir Putin puts energy pressure on them this winter.
President Biden said on Sunday's episode of 60 Minutes, he reaffirmed his commitment that U.S. troops would defend Taiwan in the event of an attack from China. Would you support him in that?
I don't know why he's talking about defending Taiwan in conflict. See, to tell the adversary precisely how you'll respond seems reckless to me. By the way, Xi Jinping no more bought that than a man in the moon. I'll be honest with you, because on the show itself, the staff reached out to us and told us, well, President Biden may have just had that wrong. I could not tell you what our policy is with respect to Taiwan today. It's very confusing. That's dangerous. It wasn't remotely confusing for our 4 years. The Chinese knew precisely what we would do, how we would do it. I communicated that. My counterparts, Secretary Esper and the Department of Defense, communicated it very clearly. But to talk about defending Taiwan suggests that it is a reasonable option for Xi Jinping to invade Taiwan. It's not a reasonable option. These are freedom-loving people. It is a sovereign, independent nation. We ought to treat it as such. And so, one can't account for the hypothetical of what might take place, but the first task of an American leader is to build relationships with the Japanese, the Australians, the South Koreans, Southeast Asia, to make sure that they, much like NATO, are doing the things that only they can do in the region to make sure that Xi Jinping understands that the risk of doing something crazy, like trying to take over the world's largest, most capable semiconductor facility, which, if taken over by the Chinese Communist Party, will change your lives within a matter of weeks and put our defensive systems here in the United States at real risk. He should be building out alliances and working on that. I'll give the administration credit for one thing on this issue. We began this process, Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross and me, to get semiconductor manufacturing back here at home. Today, we were the national leader for ever. 25 years ago, we abandoned the playing field. Today, we make about 12% of the wafers for semiconductors here in the United States. We make 0% of the ones that really matter, the most sophisticated semiconductor wafers. Secretary Ross and I created something which brought 3 companies to life to do that here. Intel's building a $20 billion plant in Ohio. Samsung's building a $15, $18 billion plant outside of Austin, Texas. And TSMC, the Taiwanese company, is building a plant outside of Phoenix. And they will bring this manufacturing back to the United States of America. We didn't finish that on our watch. I got a call, it's been 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, from Secretary Raimondo, the current Secretary of Commerce. Republicans were balking at passing the legislation which would enable this. And she said, Mike, you know, you're going to give President Biden a win, but could you help us? And the answer was really easy. This mattered, happy to help. Wrote an op-ed that appeared, took me a day, I think, so it appeared the next night. Again, this wasn't about Republican ideas. This was about an American imperative to get this equipment back on shore.
Quinnipiac poll just came out and said that 69% of Democrats and 69% of Republicans said that democracy was in danger of collapse. How did we get this way? And how do we move forward to try to eliminate the divide that's going on in this country? Because it seems to be percolating up as a major issue, democracy as a threat. Your thoughts on how we can address that?
I come back to my young days as a cadet. They gave me some uniforms. I got an old M1 rifle and the Federalist Papers. Right? These ideas are the things that bring us together. These are we're all going to fight about regulatory policy and these things. Fair enough. These ideas are central. When we begin to focus on celebrity and those things that divide us, then you end up in the place that I think those folks responding to that poll felt. I will say, I see it differently than I think that question was asked, although I don't know the precise words they used. I do think the greatest threat to our nation is here inside. I worked on things around the world. They impact us. We were just talking, right? What happens in Kyiv or Beijing matters to our lives. We're gonna pay more for stuff. We could lose some jobs. That's all true. But the single thing we could do that would be the most important to protect our republic would be to make sure that we get our schools back in the hands of people who will teach stuff to kids that actually matters. The singularly most important thing, if our kids are taught that there's an oppressor class and an oppressed class, if they're taught that the nation was founded on a racist idea, if those ideas are corrosive to the highest degree and they lead to the absence of people valuing democracy and the ballot box and those things, right? They say, well, it's all evil, it's all bad, it's all corrupt. Why would I participate? Why would I run for school board? Why would I do anything? You know, what the teachers' unions have done over these last 2 years, I think is demonstrative of the very place we find ourselves. President Biden said the other night on 60 Minutes that the pandemic is over. Not for the kids who missed school for 2 years. It's never going to be over for them. And the kids most impacted by that, the children who lost the most educational value were the children who could least afford to lose it in some of the most difficult places in our country, in our schools, inner cities in places like Wichita, Kansas. It didn't have to be. Those were political choices were made. And so when you ask, how do you get it back together, we need to make sure that we empower school board members and parents and PTAs and coaches of kids' soccer teams and take the power from Washington, D.C. When you do that, states, cities, communities, they'll come up with different ideas, but the greatness of America will rise. It always has, and I'm convinced that it will again.
If I could bring you back to Kansas, I'd love to get your thoughts on the August midterm in Kansas on the referendum. Would have overturned the state ruling that found the right to abortion in the state constitution. Now, you know the state better than I do, but I always thought it was a very red state, conservative state. President Trump carried it by 15 points in 2020. But yet it seemed to have independent
I won my race
streak.
by 19.
But it seems to have an independent streak because that referendum that people really thought that would pass went down to defeat by
Yeah.
18 points.
Yeah.
What was your reaction to that?
So if none of you can tell me what's in the referendum, I'll bet you can't either.
No, but
It was enormously confusing, and I think we saw that. It was also in the immediate aftermath of Dobbs.
Right.
It's the case today. So you think of Kansas as a red state. Today, we have a Supreme Court that was largely appointed by a Democrat governor. We have a Democrat governor today.
Right.
So we shouldn't misunderstand Kansas. Largely appointed by a Democrat governor, you have essentially abortion on demand in the state of Kansas today. And the legislature has no authority to put any restrictions, not health and safety restrictions, literally nothing. This amendment was aimed to just empower the state legislature, consistent with Dobbs. It was confusing. I can say this for sure. Every candidate who runs for office in November of this year will be pro-life. Everyone. And every candidate that wins will be pro-life. There'll be different degrees. They'll have different ideas about the limits and the like. But Kansas remains a pro-life committed place and a committed state. And national media wants to tell this story because it fits their narrative for November. The truth of the matter is that Kansans are still committed to protecting the unborn in the way that they have been for an awfully long time.
How big of an issue do you think abortion will be in this election nationwide?
I think in some close races in some Democrat states, it will make a difference. But I think in most places across the country, and as I just wander around and go to Walmart, nobody's talking about that. Well, at Walmart, they're saying, can you find the toothpaste? It's not on the shelves. And it's not funny, right? It's very Soviet to have empty shelves. I think that's what people are very focused on, the things that are impacting them each and every day. Is my kid getting a decent education? Can I afford gas for my car? I was in a pretty a nice area of California. It's been 3 months ago, I think now. Traveling soccer team canceled half of its games. These weren't people that were poor. Canceled half of their games because the parents couldn't afford gas to drive their kids to games. Those are the things that I think when we hit November, or frankly, people will start voting in just 3 or 4 weeks in a lot of places. So we think about November as the election. It's now not a day, but a month. I think those are the things that will mostly be on people's mind.
Great. I have time for some questions from the audience, and we have the students, we have the microphones, and if you could just identify yourself so that the secretary knows who you are. Earl? There's a mic right behind you.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you for having Mr. Secretary here today. His comments have been right on the money. I'm with a company called Rural Health IT Corporation in Portsmouth. We're on the front lines of fighting fentanyl and trying to reduce overdose deaths. And we're fortunate enough to earn a HRSA R-Corp grant in Windsor County, Vermont, but we also work with a lot of patients from Sullivan County in New Hampshire. So we've been very successful. Vermont, unfortunately, as we all know, is the highest rate of overdose deaths, the increase of overdose deaths in the country. Fortunately, our little county in Windsor, we were able to reduce deaths by 30% with the help of this R-Corp grant. My question is obviously that funding is very important, and it works. And I'm just wondering, in terms of your ideas and support of the continuation of, particularly for rural areas, the R-Corp HRSA grants.
So I'm not familiar with the details of that particular program. I know the HRSA more broadly. Kansas rural communities have the same set of issues. I'm very familiar with this issue of fentanyl. We had all kinds of problem with crystal meth in our state. We had opioid problems in the state of Kansas as well. These are always complicated. In the end, you have to fight it as you are. Bless you for the work you're doing, helping people avoid that, or if they become addicted, getting away from it. Federal government has a real responsibility to the simplest way to think about it is to drive up cost, right? Fentanyl today is about as cheap as it's ever been. Almost all manufactured, or at least components of it manufactured in China, transshipped to Mexico, and just smuggled across the border. Fentanyl prices have fallen dramatically since I left office. And we talk about the border, we think about the people and the tragedies. We should never forget that one of the things that is most harmful to the American people is the fact that this is now accessible in volume, in small quantities distributed all across this nation. And so those resources that you have, I think, should absolutely continue. I hope that state and local governments are contributing their fair share to making sure that we get it right, that fits a model that fits for Vermont or for New Hampshire or for Kansas or for a state. I think local delivery of these solutions is infinitely better than driving it from Washington, D.C. We'll almost always get it wrong in Washington. Maybe that's my answer. I pray that we will do all of the things that reduce the risk that someone will have access to and risk becoming addicted to. The fentanyl, the family destruction that follows from it is something we haven't fully accounted for or fully reckoned with just yet either.
Matt Mayberry? Just one. Mike?
Good morning, sir.
Matt, great to see you again.
Excellent. Could you give us your thoughts on what happened on January 6th?
Sure. You had a riot at the United States Capitol. And that's terrible. It was a bad day for the United States of America. I equally believe that the riots that took place all across this country in the summer of 2020 were bad for America too. I talked about crime, right? We should prosecute people, even if they steal less than $900 worth of stuff at Walgreens. They should be prosecuted for their crimes. And those who violated the law that day should be held fully accountable for what they did. I don't know the details. I don't know why it was that the Capitol Police, who protected me when I was a member of Congress, I don't know why they didn't have the resources and the ability to prevent that from happening. But it was a tragically bad day. It ended well. It ended with our then Vice President, Mike Pence, and our members of Congress going and finishing America's business that day. I was incredibly proud of them for that, but we should have never suffered what happened that day.
Yes, sir. Hi, Jim. Hi. Thank you.
Thanks. Jerry McDermott from ARC Behavioral Health. And just to follow up to the gentleman's earlier question, I think everyone in this room has had some family or a neighbor or coworker impacted by the opioid crisis. We're certainly not out of the woods. But my question, Mr. Secretary, is our company is in the business of drug and alcohol detox and recovery. We've got 4 facilities in Mass. We just opened in Ohio and Van Wert, and we're opening in New Jersey soon. We are just blown away by the influx of drugs, and the gentleman earlier mentioned fentanyl, so lethal. And just yesterday in Jacksonville, Florida, the sheriff's office, along with other local law enforcement, seized enough fentanyl to kill 1.5 million adults. We all know the porous border is bringing this poison into our communities. And in every suburb across America, people wring their hands about it when a neighbor's son or daughter overdoses.
Yeah.
A 2-part question, Mr. Secretary. One, how do we get it through to people in a very kind and unifying way that we need to do something about the border? Doesn't mean we're anti-immigrant, but we need to secure the border to protect our own sons and daughters from this poison. How do we do that? And number 2, what more could we and should we be doing with our intelligence community to stop China from working with the Mexican cartels and flooding the United States? It seems to me it's almost like an act of war.
Yeah.
There's so many people dead from this. Thank you.
I'm not sure I'd put almost like an act of war. Your first question was, how do we raise awareness? I think that's happening. I think people are much, I think it's more tactile. I think people can feel this more now. Maybe it's the drugs, but I think they can now see what's happening at our southern border in ways maybe they didn't for a long time. President Trump worked diligently on this, right? Anybody remember what he campaigned on, right? We're going to get out of Afghanistan, we're going to build the wall. It was a pretty short list of things he campaigned on. We can argue about tactics, but I mean, the math is just real. It took us 2.5 years because the first efforts the Trump administration had to secure our southern border were thrown out by the Ninth Circuit, right? We had all this litigation. It seems like a long time ago, but I lived it. But by year 3, we had slowed the metric for who comes across the border dramatically. We had done it by turning off the magnet, right? We did it by saying that we're welcoming people, we love you, file for asylum, but you're not going to wait here in America while you file for asylum. It became very clear to folks thinking about coming here that wasn't something they were up for. And so when I hear Vice President Harris say, no one's walking across the border, I mean, that's just gaslighting you. That's literally, I talked about being decent and being truthful and being honest and not attacking people, but you have to speak the truth. We can see, right? We all saw these 50 folks that went to Martha's Vineyard. That's an hour's worth of border crossings today. 1 hour, 50 people, 4.2 million people, 18 months. It is possible to do this, to secure. It's not just our southern border either. It's our ports of entry where people come out. So it's a multi-dimensional problem. We were serious about it and thoughtful. We did it in a way that I think was fundamentally decent as well, in that I've been down there. I've seen these people. I was at the border in Venezuela where these folks were coming into Colombia. These are people in difficult circumstances, and they are dying, and women are being sexually trafficked along that route from Venezuela and Central America to Mexico. It is not decent to open a border and ask them to come do that. It is deeply immoral in my judgment. Your second one was, well, how do you stop? What do you do? Everybody remembers there was CNN ran a piece, I don't know, I think it was in somebody's book. There have been so many books written. It's amazing when I see quotes in there from me, and I'm like, I didn't say that. Anyway, it's America. President Trump was accused of wanting to bomb Mexico. And I remember seeing this on TV and saying to my wife, no, that was actually me. And it wasn't bomb Mexico. That was the shorthand CNN used. The truth was that we could see precisely what you described. Think about this. When we've done our work in Afghanistan, we were attacking ungoverned space. We were attacked from 9/11, from this Tora Bora, place where there was no government controlling it. That's always been 6,000 miles away from us. This is why when people say, well, Mike, that's foreign policy. No, this impacts us here. Today, that ungoverned space isn't just in Afghanistan. It's a stone's throw from El Paso. There is no governing rule. There is no sheriff. The cartels are running the place. Any law enforcement there is on the take. And that is on our southern border. This is deeply dangerous. And so the story that they got wrong was we were considering how we operated in ungoverned space in the Middle East, how we might protect America from ungoverned space on our own border. How do you prevent these folks from, and this is an intentionality on the part of the Chinese government, how do you prevent the Xi Jinping from moving these drugs into our America to undermine and put our nation in decline? What are the tools we might have? And so we began to think about how we might use the full range of America's capacity to protect us from these ungoverned spaces. We should renew that. It will be a hard-fought, difficult conversation with the Mexican government, for sure. But this is about us, and this is about protecting Americans. And you were both talking about the lives that have been impacted. America's leaders should be resolved to figure out how to stop it. It is absolutely possible not to get to zero, but to take it down substantially.
We have time for 1 or 2 more questions.
That's a short way of saying I'm answering too long. Okay. It's very kind of you.
Matt, why'd you wait for the mic? That's St. A's outstanding student.
Hey, Mr. Secretary, I think you've mentioned, almost every hot spot in the world, and it seems crazier every day. But, blessed be the peacemakers. Can you just talk about how you were able to help orchestrate the Abraham Accords and where you see maybe things going from here, if there's potential for expanding that?
So for decades, we've sent a lot of our kids to the Middle East to fight and risk their lives. And if there's one thing President Trump was pretty clear about, he didn't want any part of that. We also knew that this is an incredibly unstable place upon which the world depends, and we needed to figure out a way to meld these two ideas. How do you keep from having to send Marines and soldiers and sailors there, but deliver peace and prosperity to the region to take down risk? And so I can't tell you that we wrote down the Abraham Accords on a paper and worked backwards. Rather, it was an evolution in thinking. It began with 3 central ideas, and then a little bit of luck. The central ideas were that we have one good friend and partner, the nation of Israel, who is a security partner, who is a democracy that has a robust technology, economic community, and they're going to be with us. So we locked in. As the CIA director, my first week, I went to meet my counterpart, who's the director of Mossad, a guy named Yossi Cohen. And we put the CIA and Mossad to begin working problem sets against the second pillar, which was Iran. I would brief the president as CIA director almost every day, which was unusual. It's usually not the director, but he wanted me there. And he would say every so often, Mike, every time you tell me about a problem in the Middle East, it's about Iran. Right? Shia militias in Iraq, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, all Iranian-sponsored PIJ and Hamas in the Gaza Strip, firing rockets into Israel. You always tell me it's Iran. So we were serious about pushing back against the regime in Iran. We took them from $96 billion in foreign exchange reserves to $4 billion. It is shameful that President Biden and his team have now given Iran a green light. They haven't lifted the sanctions, but they're not enforcing them, so we're same effect as lifting them. Iran's economy will grow more than the American economy this year. That's not good. And it's dangerous. It's dangerous for Israel. It's dangerous for us here at home. So tuck in tight with Israel, push back against Iran. And then, this is the luck part, was part of the third pillar. We had this remarkable series of leaders. We had the Crown Prince in the Emirates, a fellow named Mohammed bin Zayed. We had an amazing leader in Bahrain. We had Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel. And we had a Crown Prince in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia who ultimately didn't sign the Abraham Accords, but was a true partner in helping build out a framework for peace in those countries. And then between Trump and Netanyahu, we were able to deliver a series of outcomes for each of the countries that convinced them that wiping Israel from the face of the earth was bad foreign policy. Look, today, this is amazing. No one would have believed if I was on this stage 5 years ago and I told you that Emirati fighters would be flying in formation alongside Israeli fighters. You'd have laughed me off the stage, and you would have been right to do so. May not be happening right now, but it'll happen in the next week. They are no longer antagonists, enemies. They are partners, making a lot of money together, building their lives. Jews, Muslims, Christians, all working together. Pretty remarkable. And the good Lord bless the Abraham Accords. I pray that we'll continue to build. More countries will sign them. Israel will handle this properly and rightly. And most importantly for us, crude oil and natural gas will continue to flow, and we won't have to send our kids to this tough place. That's why the Abraham Accords actually matter most to me. One more?
One more. Tom Petty, want to wait for the mic? And that'll conclude.
Oh, yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir.
You're a West Point cadet, and thank you for your service. You're a CIA director, Secretary of State. You obviously have had a great concern for the importance of our intelligence and our classified information. I'm wondering what your thinking is on the current situation with the discovery of classified documents when former presidents' residence.
You bet. Nobody gets to keep classified documents in the place they're not supposed to be. Not the former Secretary of State, nobody. Sometimes documents that are classified shouldn't be. We should declassify them, sounds good to me. But if a document's classified and properly so, it protects us, right? I think about the information that Julian Assange leaked. I think about the stolen documents that put our soldiers and sailors at risk. We have to protect that information. There is a reason that we have a process. So no president gets to keep them in that place either. You can hold a second thought in your head too, though, which is that the raid on Mar-a-Lago was indecent and improper and historically unprecedented and a terrible idea for our democracy. You can hold both of those thoughts in your head at the same time. It's possible that there are two wrongs that took place there. By the way, I don't know what documents were there. We'll see what they were. We'll see whether they were really classified. We'll figure all that out. And precisely what was there. But for the Justice Department to conduct a raid on a former president's home is really, really, to your point earlier about our democracy, it is something one really has to think long and hard about. I pray that they did and that they understand all of the ramifications that flow from that. I served on the Benghazi Committee. Hillary Clinton had classified stuff everywhere. Everywhere. We never once suggested that the United States Department of Justice should raid Hillary Clinton's home. We worked. We said, you need to get that back. You need to put it back here. We need to put that back in the box. You need to, right? We did what decent people do to make sure that our republic stands. We identified a problem set and we resolved it in a way that didn't upend America's confidence. And maybe I'll close with this thought. We talked about all kinds of challenges. This is what we do when we come together. That's fantastic. There's some finance people in the room. You should know I'm long America. I got a chance to travel to hundreds of countries around the world. There is no nation that I would bet on more for the next 10 years, 50 years, or 250 years than ours. Because folks like you come out on mornings like this to debate and have a discussion. I pray that the leaders that you all elect in November will be worthy of your efforts, and they will be decent. There'll be those from both parties that they will be decent. They will respect America's history. And this nation that, that I've spent so much time working on and working alongside great people to try and protect, that it is worth fighting for, and you all will stay in that fight. I pray that, I hope that, I am confident that that will be the case. Thank you for giving me the chance to be with you here this morning. Bless you all.